Millard Fillmore enters the record without the thunder that posterity likes to lend its protagonists. He is the kind of American the 19th century produced in bulk and then too often forgot, a boy born in a cabin on land not yet steady in title, apprenticed to a cloth dresser who worked the dye into homespun, self-taught enough to teach, then self-taught enough to read law by firelight, patient enough to wait for a borrowed book, and stubborn enough to return it with marginalia. His manners are plain, his clothes are tidy without being dashing, his sentences run straight and do not wink, his pride sits in the middle distance, visible but not gaudy. He is an upstate New Yorker before upstate becomes a political noun, a man who knows the feel of a winter road in shoes that leak and the sound a creek makes when it cheats a miller. He marries Abigail Powers, the minister's daughter who had been his teacher, and between them, the Republic gets one of its quieter partnerships, two readers who measure progress by shelves filled and debts paid, two schoolteachers who never quite stop teaching when life requires other work. The country he will inherit as president prefers banners to book lists. Still, he believes that institutions are made of reading rooms before they are made of marble. He learns politics the way an industrious journeyman learns carpentry, watching how the joints hold and which shortcuts cause a floor to sag in spring. He begins as an anti-Mason when the movement is a moral spasm about secrecy and privilege, then converts his reforming instinct into Whiggery when he discovers that outrage needs a ledger to become law. In Congress, he becomes that rare creature a deliberative body cannot function without and cannot easily love. A chairman who can add, a floor manager who can remember where the money is supposed to come from, a writer of tariff schedules who can persuade colleagues to treat revenue as arithmetic rather than as a pledge to constituents with mills. He helps shape the tariff of 1842, and if his name does not warm the blood of later romantics, it is because he prefers cold columns that add up. He's comptroller of New York when that means the difference between a seat and a stool, and he does the job with a schoolmaster's neatness. He founds a university in Buffalo because he believes cities become themselves at libraries and clinics. He campaigns loyally for the party without pretending to be the party's poet. He does favors when favors are machines that help policy work, and says no when favors are just favors. He is not glamorous. He is reliable. That is the beginning of his strength and the start of the trouble that will find him when the mood of the country insists on a fable. In 1848, the Whigs need a uniform more than a brief. They nominate Zachary Taylor, the quiet soldier with the straw hat, and pair him with Fillmore to comfort New York merchants and to balance the ticket with a man who has counted votes and appropriations long enough to know where the noises in Washington come from. Taylor, once elected, builds a cabinet out of reputations of varying weight. Fillmore presides over the Senate with the precision of a man who thinks rules are the only furniture that keeps a room from turning into a fight. He is not the president's shadow. He is his own instrument, collite with the anti-slavery men who have found a home in the Whig caucus, civil with the conservatives who distrust the agitation they smell in northern newspapers. Determined above all that the government must act like a government, even when the country wants drama. Then heat, fruit, and a hateful germ make a coin toss of nature look like fate. Taylor dies in July 1850. The chair is empty, the calendar is full, and the largest pile on the desk is labeled with a single word that already makes the language feel worn: slavery. He steps into the office with a gesture that is almost invisible and utterly decisive. He changes the cabinet. In a city that treats courtesy like a script, that is a line rewritten. Out go Taylor's men. In comes a roster that tells Washington and the states what kind of government this will be. Daniel Webster at State, bringing gravity and a last performance. Thomas Corwin later at Treasury. John J. Crittenden at Justice. Alexander H. Stewart at Interior. Graham at Navy. Charles Conrad at War. Nathan Hall at the Post Office. These are names that signal a policy: conciliation wrapped in procedure, unionism without taunting, a willingness to accept what the arithmetic of the moment requires, if the arithmetic can be squared with law. The country is not soothed by names. The country wants to know whether California's petition to enter as a free state will be swallowed or spat back. Whether the lines in New Mexico and Utah will be drawn with a pencil labeled popular sovereignty or with a knife labeled Senate arithmetic. Whether the Texas claim to Santa Fe will be indulged. Whether the slave trade in Washington City will be allowed to go on while the Capitol's dome rises. And whether the Fugitive Slave Act, demanded by the South as payment for California, will be a law in print or a law in fact. These questions do not have charming answers. He begins characteristically by reading. He reads and then he decides. The Compromise of 1850, the statue Henry Clay chisels from Quarles and Stephen Douglas, finally cuts into blocks that can be carried through the chamber, is a mosaic rather than a single stone. Fillmore had disliked omnibus bills when he watched them from the chair. He does not adore them now, but the nation's patients will not take their medicine separately. The doctor must disguise the bitterness in a stew. He cooperates because he believes the Union is a legal organism, the only kind of organism he trusts, and that law must be the way stitches are placed and the way wounds are cleaned. He signs the parts when Congress finally delivers them in pieces. California free, Texas's border cut back with $10 million as balm and debt relief. Territorial governments for Utah and New Mexico without congressional prohibitions on slavery, leaving the question to settlers and to the climate that a certain party insists will do its own legislating. The slave trade, not slavery, abolished in the District of Columbia. The Fugitive Slave Act rewritten into a sharper instrument with federal commissioners, curtailed jury involvement, and penalties for the kindly and the brave who interfere. He is not a theorist of sin. He is the custodian of a building that will collapse if weight is not distributed. The signatures make him president in full. The enforcements make him famous in a way he never wanted to be. The fugitive law is not a clause to be inhaled and forgotten. It's a set of instructions that, once followed, will stain the sidewalks of northern cities and force citizens to decide whether obedience to statute can be reconciled with decency. Austin supplies the nation with the pictures and the nouns. In February 1851, Shadrach Minkins, seized as a fugitive, is carried out of a courthouse by black Bostonians and abolitionists. Fillmore's proclamation follows, crisp, statutory, warning officers and citizens that law broken in daylight remains broken when cheered. The trials sputter, the city's conscience is loud, the law remains. Weeks later, Thomas Sims is seized, guarded with chains that make a federal building look besieged by its own countrymen, marched to a ship and sent south while church bells toll, and a president in Washington reads the marshal's report to make sure the procedures were kept. In Pennsylvania, that same autumn, the Christiana resistance leaves one slaveholder dead and a set of defendants charged with treason. The prosecutions falter under juries that will not pronounce their neighbors traitors for shutting their doors against a posse. Fillmore, who neither invented the law nor hid from it, discovers what every custodian of the Union had already suspected, that statute can compel men to carry out actions their children will be ashamed of, and that executive attention, applied with scruple, cannot make the feeling go away. He does not rail. He administers. He does not dramatize. He persists. He will not, as president, license disobedience to a law he has just signed. He will not, as a gentleman, pretend that the noise is merely noise. He is not merely the sheriff of a compromise. He is the sponsor of a style of government that turns bellicosity into punctuation marks and then omits them. When private armies in American hats set out from American harbors for Cuba to liberate the island into plantation fantasies, he invokes the Neutrality Acts. Narciso Lopez sails anyway. His expedition collapses. Spanish firing squads write the ending in Havana. American crowds howl. Fillmore refuses to let outrage rewrite the statute book. He answers bluster with warrants. He receives Lajos Kossuth, the Hungarian exile descended upon by American enthusiasm, with courtesy and a neutrality that seems cold to those who prefer foreign policy to be a sermon. He believes republics are built by discipline, not by applause for romantic visitors. He recognizes the independence of Hawaii and warns European chancelleries, by way of Daniel Webster and then Edward Everett, that annexation by foreign powers would not be received as a friendly act, an extension and clarification of the Tyler posture, spoken with the dryness of a man who prefers sentences that can be enforced. He authorizes, at the end of his term, the expedition that will carry Commodore Matthew Perry to Japan. The letter that Perry brings to the Tokugawa court is written in Fillmore's formal diction and carries an argument about commerce that will look in retrospect like the first knuckle of a century's handshake. He is not the president who receives the treaty. He is the one who shipped the idea. Between foreign dispatches, the quiet practicalities multiply. The Library of Congress burns in 1851. He and Abigail, who has smuggled a private library into the White House because she believes presidents ought to read at home as well as at their desks, preside over the work of beginning again. She arranges shelves and an ethos. He arranges appropriations and a promise. Washington remembers them for giving the executive mansion a mind. He signs the appropriations that let Samuel Morse's wire creep outward and become a habit rather than an experiment. He staffs the newborn Interior Department as if ledgers are a moral document. He appoints Brigham Young as governor of the new Utah Territory, not because he admires the saints' theology, but because he respects the arithmetic of authority and the need to regularize a community's dealings with the federal government. He likes canals, harbors, and lighthouses. He likes the improvements that can be seen on a map without needing to be sung about at a banquet. He does not turn the presidency into an instrument of magnificence. He turns it into a shop floor where orders are written and the rivets are counted. None of this saves him from the logic of party when the party is tired of compromising with itself. The Whigs, riven between Seward's moral eloquence and Webster's institutional piety, searching 1852 for a general to make the speech that absolves them from choosing. Fillmore wants renomination, not because he loves the job's performances, but because he believes he has administered its pains with decency. His friends count delegates. His enemies count signatures under a fugitive law and discover that he can be made to carry every chain in visibility, even when others forge the links. The convention dances its miserable quadrille, Fillmore, Webster, Scott. In ballot after ballot, the anti-slavery wing cannot forgive the enforcement. The conservative wing cannot forgive the anti-slavery wing. The compromise wing is tired. Eventually, the delegates choose Winfield Scott for his uniform and his availability. Fillmore returns to Washington to finish the chores of a presidency that has been declared over by men in hats who are not yet done with the country's headaches. He signs papers and refuses to resent the city aloud. Abigail watches, knowing with a teacher's clairvoyance that her husband is more durable at desks than in songs. The end of his term is unkind in personal time. Pierce takes the oath. The Fillmores attend. Shortly afterward, Abigail catches the cold that becomes a fever, that becomes the sentence every era writes with its most fashionable germ. She dies within weeks, leaving the house that had finally belonged to them as readers, a room where everything has been underlined. Their daughter, Mary Abigail, clever, true, Abby, to those who loved her, will die a year later of cholera at 22. The country will argue about men who shout. The widower will walk rooms. He returns to Buffalo, attends to the university, chairs meetings, writes neat minutes, turns public grief into private utility, because that is what he has always done. He reads. He accepts that a life that began with borrowed books should end with arranged shelves and town meetings, where he can make sure the committee does not forget the point of the meeting. The next chapter he writes for himself is the one most awkward to carry with charity, and perhaps therefore the one that must be carried with the largest possible effort of comprehension, rather than dismissal. In 1856, the American Party, the Know-Nothings, to their enemies and eventually to history, offers him a ballot line at a time when the Whigs are fragmenting into memory and fragments, and when the new Republican coalition is hardening around an anti-slavery platform that comes packaged in many places with a sermon about immigrants and Catholic parishes that Fillmore does not say amen to. He accepts the banner not because he has become a nativist ideologue, he is too legal and too secular for that, but because he imagines that a Union party indifferent to European quarrels and suspicious of new sectional absolutes might be fashioned out of local resentments and national fatigue. It is a misreading of the hour. He speaks Union in a year that wants thunder. He carries Maryland and little else. He is blamed for the company he kept. He deserves, at least in part, the scolding. But there is also this. He is trying, in his familiar way, to make an institution out of a mood and to keep a republic together by routing passions through ballots rather than streets. The age does not want his kind of carpentry. It wants a conflagration that can be called purification. He returns to Buffalo, where carpentry remains in demand. If the measure of a presidency is whether it made worse things less likely, his ledger is not a failure. It is a reprieve written in a hand many refuse to read. He enforced an ugly law because he believed the ugliness would be greater if law learned to be optional. He accepted new borders and new governments in the Southwest because he had the sense to see that a nation is a set of jurisdictions as much as a set of sentiments. He restrained freelance imperialists because he preferred peace to romance and treaties to headlines. He equipped an expedition to a closed empire because he could glimpse commerce where others saw mystery. He helped place a library back on its feet because he thought the mind of the government should be whole, even when the government's heart was tired. He made enemies because he insisted on treating a rebellion of consciences as if it could be managed by docket and marshal. His critics were right to say that some consciences cannot be docketed. He made friends because clerks and officers and sea captains discovered that the signature in the bottom right corner belonged to a man who read what he signed. There are faults that need no decoration to be seen clearly. He had no rhetorical sympathy for the idea that the law could be unjust and still be law, and that the moral sense of communities might sometimes serve as the only court in which statutes receive a real hearing. He was not cruel to fugitives. He was cold to the possibility that the best enforcement is sometimes restraint. He was not indifferent to the suffering of people who would be kidnapped under color of federal process. He was unwilling to make exceptions that would teach states to make their own exceptions for matters he cared about. He failed, in other words, at the paradox that the age set before every national officer to govern a union whose compact demanded fidelity to bargains that an increasing number of citizens experienced as an insult to their faith. He chose fidelity when others chose fury. He kept the peace for 4 years and paid for it with his reputation among people who had learned that peace, under those terms, was itself an injury. But there are virtues that make their case stubbornly, even when fashion would prefer to be done with them. He believed the federal government should be neither a sledgehammer nor a songbook. It should be a set of desks where letters are answered and ships dispatched and money tallied. He believed the executive should not perform goodness. It should do good by refusing to waste lives on impulse and by binding the country to other countries with paper and not with powder. He believed that schools matter, and that a presidency that puts a library in order leaves a gift to the future that will outlast many grander enactments. He believed that it is possible to be a gentleman without money and a president without thunder. And he believed, above all, that the Union is worth the inconvenience of compromise and the embarrassment of the occasional necessary statute, because dissolution is not a principle, it is a calamity. On that last belief he was not unique. He was simply honest enough to act as if he meant it. If you want to see him whole, keep 3 rooms in your eye. In the first, a young man stands in a shop where wool takes the color of someone else's choice, looks at his hands, and decides that the law is a better dye. He borrows books and returns them with notes. He marries the woman who gave him the first of those books, and together they teach a town how to read. In the second, an older man sits at a table while the country shouts outside the window. He picks up a pen and signs a bill that will make the shouting worse, because not signing it will make the shouting something else, something that breaks glass and parchment. He does not smile. He writes a proclamation in language that fits inside a statute book. He knows the marshals, names and the dates of the next transmission from the squadron in the Pacific, and the boundary calls coming from a territory where Texans want more map than right. In the third, a widower walks through a house in Buffalo with books on every flat surface and a memory in every chair. He goes to meetings. He improves a university. He answers letters from people who hate him and people who love him and people who simply want a thing done. He grows old without becoming bitter, because bitterness is wasteful. He dies in 1874 with his papers in order and his reputation still being written by people who prefer statutes to shelves. Millard Fillmore will never be the hero of those who require their leaders to make history shout. He will remain indispensable to people who think history survives because someone remembered to turn the key in the morning and set out the blotters. The war that came after him is a better story than his careful peace. The emancipation that followed makes his reluctance to defy statute look timid. The men who roared will always take up more space on the page than the man who counted. Yet the page exists because men like him kept the press oiled. The Union he tried to preserve with measures that humiliated cities and calmed capitals did not die on his watch. It bought time. That time contained births, books, wharves, and miles of wire. He cannot be credited with what others did in the time he bought, and he must be blamed for how he paid. The bill will never balance in a way that satisfies everyone. It balances in the only way lives do, by insisting that intention matters, method matters, and consequences matter most of all, even when the chain between a signature and a sorrow cannot be untangled to everyone's satisfaction. He is a lesson for moments when the Republic believes only drama counts. Drama counts when the house is on fire. Most mornings, someone must sweep the steps. Millard Fillmore was a sweeper who found himself holding the hose while crowds argued about water rights and guilt, and how to read the clause that says neighbors owe something to one another, even when they disagree about God. He did not shrink from the hose. He also did not invent the fire. That is the fairest sentence to give him, not a savior, not a villain, a steward whose hands were clean, except when the job demanded otherwise, who kept the keys where they could be found, and who believed, more stubbornly than most, that a free country proves it is free by doing its work in the open even when the work is ugly. He left behind, and this is the final inventory that suits him, quiet institutions, a university that still educates, a library reconstituted after flame, a civil service slightly more regular than he found it, a navy with a chart to a distant court, a dispatch box marked Hawaii that taught Europe there were limits, a set of proclamations that kept hotheads from writing the nation into foreign alibis, an interior department that began to learn the cruel arithmetic of administering vast lands and peoples who never voted on the treaties that bound them. He also left laws that would be enforced by men who did not possess his care, and habits he despised ready to grow where fatigue cut down vigilance. He was neither the cause nor the cure of the nation's worst quarrel. He was its clerk for 4 years and its quiet conscience when conscience meant following a book that others had stopped reading. He deserves neither derision nor beatification. He deserves the respect due to anyone who kept the doors open while the roof groaned.